The gavel had barely struck when it happened. A ripple of bold defiance from Jasmine Crockett, a direct challenge to a courtroom tradition so old it had grown dusty with neglect, had just filled the air, and Judge Edward Chen laughed. It all was not loud. It was not mocking. It was almost worse, a small amused chuckle that sliced through the tension like a blade. For a second, it felt like the entire Edward R. Roybal Federal Building leaned forward, breath caught somewhere between their ribs and their throats. Reporters froze mid-note. Law students stopped blinking. The buzz of whispered speculation that had filled the room earlier died as if someone had sucked all the oxygen from the room. Every eye snapped to Jasmine, waiting, measuring. Would she flinch? Would she stammer? Would she fold under the pressure that only the laughter of a judge could create? That unbearable mixture of skepticism, authority, and dismissal? Instead, Jasmine Crockett simply breathed, one slow, steady inhale. She did not smile. She did not roll her eyes. She did not even shift her weight. Before we dive deeper into what happened next, comment where you're watching from and do not forget to subscribe, so you never miss powerful real-life stories like this one. With a grace so deliberate it almost felt theatrical, she reached down and gently straightened a single page of her notes, a movement so small, so precise, that it screamed louder than any words, "I will not be moved." Across the gallery, a mother clutched her son's hand tighter. A young associate attorney fresh out of law school swallowed hard and leaned forward. The older journalists, the ones who thought they had seen everything, exchanged glances that said, "Maybe we were wrong." Jasmine's eyes never left the bench, not even for a second. Judge Chen, leaning back in his imposing black chair, steepled his fingers thoughtfully under his chin. The small smile that had briefly danced across his mouth was gone now, replaced with something else. Curiosity, maybe even a hint of respect. In that moment, nobody knew Jasmine Crockett was about to rewrite the entire room. The silence stretched, long enough for uncertainty to bloom in the heart of every doubter who had packed into courtroom 7B to watch her crash and burn. But Jasmine was not here for spectacle. She was not here to beg for approval. She was here to crack something open, something bigger than herself, bigger than even the case she had come to fight. She adjusted the microphone in front of her, not hurried, not hesitant, just a small click, the kind of ordinary sound that, in this charged air, landed like a starting gun. And then her voice. "Your Honor," she said, crisp and clear, slicing through the silence like a clean blade. "We are here today because when tradition is used as a weapon against fairness, it must be challenged." The courtroom did not breathe. It listened. The city hummed outside the courthouse, a low, restless vibration that never truly slept. Downtown Los Angeles wore its usual armor of concrete and tension that morning, but inside the Edward R. Roybal Federal Building, the air was something else entirely. It was heavier, charged, as if the building itself knew something rare was about to unfold. Courtroom 7B was a living organism, pulsing, shifting, breathing. Every seat had been taken long before the session's scheduled start. The marble floors at the back wall were lined with students in rumpled suits, activists with folded arms, off-duty cops in plain clothes trying to blend in. Cameras were forbidden inside, but that had not stopped the press. They clustered near the entrances, notebooks ready, eyes sharpened. These people had not come for just another day in court. They had come because whispers had escaped into the city's bloodstream weeks ago. Jasmine Crockett was stepping back into a courtroom, not as a congresswoman, but as a fighter, and not for a high-profile political case or some flashy constitutional debate. For a kid, one young man from Riverside, one of the thousands who had fallen into the cracks of a system that liked to talk about fairness, but rarely delivered it. This case, a seemingly small procedural fight over outdated court practices, had swollen into something symbolic, a proxy war over systemic injustice, fought inside one overheated courtroom under the jaundiced lights of tradition and power. It was not just about this boy anymore. It was about the millions he represented. At exactly 9 a.m., the double doors swung open with a mechanical groan, and Jasmine Crockett entered. She did not grandstand. She did not wave or flash smiles at familiar reporters. She walked with quiet, measured steps, carrying nothing but a slim, battered leather portfolio tucked against her side. No designer jewelry, no attention-grabbing colors, just a simple navy blue suit, perfectly tailored but understated. An armor built not to attract eyes but to deflect them, to remind everyone in the room why they were really there. She looked different. Not the polished congresswoman giving sound bites on Capitol Hill, not the firebrand debater cutting through noise on cable news. Here, Jasmine Crockett was stripped down to the core, an advocate, a fighter, a lawyer, nothing more, and absolutely nothing less. A few students in the gallery nudged each other. One young activist, wearing a battered "Justice for All" pin on his jacket, whispered under his breath, "That's her." The old guard reporters, the ones who had written about riots, scandals, and scandals about riots, leaned forward, pens already hovering. Across the room, behind the high, polished bench, the Honorable Judge Edward Chen entered through his private door, a man whose reputation traveled ahead of him like thunder. He was not known for playing favorites. He was not known for mercy. He was not even known for consistency. What Judge Chen was known for was sharpness, an edge honed so fine that lawyers who underestimated him rarely left the courtroom without scars, and occasionally he was known for something else, a surprising, almost mischievous humor that would crack through his armor at unexpected moments, a weapon as much as a shield. Today, his face was unreadable. He wore the black robe like an executioner's cloak, settling into his chair without ceremony. A tap of his gavel silenced the murmurs instantly. "We'll proceed," he said, his voice calm but edged with a note that suggested this morning was not going to unfold the way anyone expected. At the far counsel table, adjusting his silk tie and smirking like he had already won, was Leonard Ashworth, the old lion, the courtroom veteran, the kind of lawyer who had made a career out of weaponizing tradition, quoting dusty precedents and charming juries into submission. Today he wore a charcoal suit that likely cost more than most of the law students in the gallery would earn their first year out. An expensive watch gleamed on his wrist. Every inch of him screamed polished, comfortable, and dangerously certain. He glanced at Jasmine as she settled into her seat. Across from him, not a hard stare, not a sneer, just a casual flick of the eyes, a tiny lift of one eyebrow. Dismissal, plain and simple. But Jasmine acted like she did not see it. She pulled a single sheet of paper from her leather folio and placed it carefully on the table before her. Her hands were steady, her breathing slow, her focus laser sharp. Judge Chen watched her with the barest hint of curiosity. Ashworth, meanwhile, leaned back, confident that he was about to outmaneuver a congresswoman playing dress-up as a lawyer. The crowd leaned forward, unconsciously, the weight of 1,000 private expectations bearing down on the room. Nobody knew it yet. Not the students scribbling in their notebooks. Not the mother gripping her purse strap so hard it bit into her palm. Not even the seasoned courtroom reporters quietly betting against her. But Jasmine Crockett was about to remind them all. This was her arena too. Jasmine rose from her seat, the faint squeak of her chair sounding louder than it should have in the stillness of the courtroom. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. She moved the way mountains shift, slowly, inevitably. Before speaking, she reached for the glass of water on the table beside her, a simple act, unremarkable on the surface. But the way she did it, steady hand, unshaking fingers, calm lift to her lips, told everyone watching exactly what they needed to know. This woman was unbreakable. She sipped once, set the glass down with precision, adjusted a single sheet of notes on her portfolio. Tiny movements, massive signals, resilience layered into every micro-action. She stepped toward the podium without fanfare. Her shoes struck the marble with a soft, rhythmic cadence, like a war drum slowed down for dramatic effect. Jasmine paused just a heartbeat before the microphone, then leaned in slightly, just enough to make her presence undeniable, but not so much as to seem desperate. She looked directly at Judge Chen, not challenging, not pleading, simply present, fully, completely. "Your Honor," she began, her voice even and measured. "Opposing counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the gallery." The opening words flowed smoothly. No unnecessary flourishes, no dramatic pauses for applause, just clean, sharpened language. "We are here today," she continued, because the foundation of our justice system demands more than habit. It demands fairness. It demands courage. The crowd shifted subtly. Students leaned forward, pens momentarily forgotten. One of the older reporters, a man with a battered notebook and a skeptical frown, lifted his head. Even the security guards at the back of the room seemed a little less disinterested. This wasn't grandstanding. This wasn't a speech crafted for headlines. It was different. It was deliberate. It was surgical. It was real. Jasmine laid out the facts with surgical clarity. Her client, a young man wrongfully boxed in by procedural loopholes, had been denied a basic chance at defense. An outdated courtroom rule, upheld through generations without question, had stacked the deck against him before he even stepped inside. As she spoke, she flipped through her notes with small, steady motions. Every page turned slow and controlled, like flipping the pages of an old book she had studied 1,000 times. Symbolism baked into every move. This is not new to me. This is not beyond me. This is not something you can dismiss. And it was not just legal jargon she wielded. Interwoven between case law and constitutional principles were real human costs. The mother who worked 2 jobs and still showed up for every court date. The brother who had to explain to his younger siblings why the system seemed rigged. The lost nights of sleep. The fraying hope. Jasmine didn't yell. She didn't dramatize. She simply placed the truth down in front of the room, piece by undeniable piece, like a craftsman laying stone. Judge Chen watched her carefully, fingertips steepled again under his chin. Ashworth across the aisle had lost the smirk, not obviously, but in the small tightness around his mouth, the way his hands gripped his pen a little too hard. Jasmine pivoted cleanly into the heart of her argument. Justice, she said, is not served by tradition for tradition's sake. It is not preserved by clinging to habits that have long since lost their honor. It is protected by vigilance, by courage, by the willingness to ask hard questions, even when it is uncomfortable. You could feel it in the gallery now. A shift, not explosive, not noisy, something deeper. Respect. Students glanced at each other, a flicker of excitement in their eyes. Reporters leaned in harder, recognizing a moment that demanded more than a perfunctory headline. Even the older attorneys in the room, veterans of 1,000 tired court battles, sat a little straighter. Jasmine Crockett was not here to play. She was here to move the earth. She flipped her last page neatly, set it down with precision, and lifted her gaze fully to Judge Chen once more. And so, she concluded, voice unwavering, we ask this court today not to uphold a tradition, but to uphold justice. Because when the two are in conflict, the law demands we choose justice, not because it is easy, not because it is popular, but because it is right. She stepped back from the podium without waiting for applause, because she did not need it. She simply gathered her papers again, took another slow sip of water and sat down, an army in a navy blue suit, waging war one breath at a time. Jasmine Crockett did not just argue her case, she challenged the bones of the courtroom itself. Midway through her presentation, she paused, not out of hesitation, but precision, then drew attention to a rule buried deep in decades of dusty legal tradition, an old procedural relic, one that had, for generations, tilted the scales quietly and invisibly against defendants like her client, a rule no one had questioned in public for years. Until now, Jasmine laid it bare with a calm, lethal clarity. Respectfully, Your Honor, tradition must never become the enemy of fairness. The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy, undeniable, charged. For half a heartbeat, Judge Chen simply stared at her, and then, he laughed, soft, brief, but loud enough that it cut through the tension like a snapped cable on a suspension bridge. Not cruel, not hostile, just a small sound, the kind you made when someone surprised you, when someone poked at something you never expected to be questioned. But in a courtroom loaded with this much pressure, even a chuckle hit like a seismic event. The room reacted instantly. The reporters stiffened in their seats. Students looked around, wide-eyed. Even Ashworth, leaning smugly at his table, tilted his head slightly, reading the moment with hungry eyes. All eyes swung back to Jasmine, waiting, measuring, hoping to see a crack. But Jasmine Crockett was built differently. She did not smile. She did not flinch. She did not even blink. She simply stood there, hands calm at her sides, back straight, gaze locked forward, a soldier facing an unexpected cannon blast and refusing to move. The silence ballooned again, thicker this time, stitched with electricity. Judge Chen, still steepled behind his bench, tilted his head a fraction as if silently inviting her. Go ahead. Prove it matters. Jasmine adjusted the corner of her notes with one finger. Another micro-movement. Another silent declaration. I am not here to entertain you. I am here to dismantle you. And when she finally spoke again, her voice was not louder. It was sharper, cleaner, more dangerous. The courtroom still buzzed silently from Judge Chen's unexpected chuckle, but if Jasmine Crockett felt the tremor under her feet, she gave no sign of it. Instead, she did something so small, so subtle, that it shifted the current of the room. Without a single word, she reached up, calmly, deliberately, and adjusted the lapels of her navy blue jacket. It was not a nervous movement. It was not fidgeting. It was the tightening of armor, the silent preparation of a warrior stepping back into the ring, knowing the next blow could come harder, and welcoming it anyway. Then, just as controlled, just as precise, Jasmine took a slow step forward, one step, measured, claiming space, not asking for it, an offensive move in a room that wanted her to retreat. The energy inside courtroom 7B twisted, like a rope being pulled tighter. You could feel it, see it, smell it. A ripple of attention, small but undeniable, passed through the gallery. Students leaned in a little closer. Reporters, their pens poised mid-air, forgot to jot their next notes. Even Leonard Ashworth, lounging behind his polished table, shifted slightly in his seat, the kind of instinctive move predators make when they realize the prey might bite back harder than expected. Jasmine's voice filled the space again, not louder, but heavier. Your Honor, she said, her tone steady as the foundations of the building itself. We respect tradition when it honors justice, but when tradition strays, when it becomes a shield for injustice instead of a sword for protection, then tradition must yield. There was no theatrical flourish in her delivery, no attempt to dramatize her words. The strength lay in the simplicity, the unshakable conviction that echoed between every syllable. Judge Chen, fingers still steepled, watched her with a sharper focus now. The hint of amusement that had curled the corners of his mouth earlier was gone, replaced by something heavier, more cautious. Jasmine did not stop. With slow, intentional movements, she flipped another page of her notes. No rustling, no fumble, just one clean turn, another tiny battle won. She stepped forward again, half a pace this time, invading the dead air between her and the bench, not aggressively, not arrogantly, simply claiming the space truth demanded. Her next words were a scalpel, not a sword. This court has long held that fairness is not a courtesy, but a mandate of the Constitution, she continued. And where procedures calcify into weapons of exclusion, where rules are twisted to deny the very protections they are meant to guarantee, we have a duty, not merely an opportunity, but an obligation to correct the course. Ashworth crossed his arms, his jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Not yet. Even he could feel it. The tide that had started turning the moment Jasmine touched her jacket was now rising around him. Judge Chen leaned back slightly, not dismissively, not casually, as if giving himself a few extra inches of space to think, to recalibrate. And still, Jasmine pressed forward, not with volume, not with speed, but with gravity. Every step, every word, every tiny adjustment of her notes redirecting the courtroom's energy away from skepticism and into raw, reluctant respect. She was not fighting a person. She was fighting an idea. That tradition, simply by being old, deserved to survive. She set her last page neatly on the podium, her fingers brushing its edge once, as if sealing it shut with finality. Then she lifted her gaze, direct, steady, steel-forged. Justice, she said, was never meant to be a monument to habit. It was meant to be a living promise. No sound came from the gallery, not a cough, not a whisper, not even a chair creak. The only thing that moved was a subtle, invisible current, pulling the room tighter around Jasmine Crockett. And this time Judge Chen did not laugh. He listened. Leonard Ashworth rose from his chair with the kind of confident ease that only comes from decades of courtroom victories. He straightened his tie, smoothed the front of his tailored suit, and strolled toward the podium like a man who had already won the argument. His voice, when he spoke, was smooth as glass. Your Honor, he began with a well-practiced half-smile, while Congresswoman Crockett's enthusiasm is certainly admirable, we must not lose sight of the foundation upon which this courtroom stands. He launched into a polished monologue, layered, with language designed to sound reassuring, unshakable. Precedent, stability, tradition, order. Every word dripped with the unspoken message. She is new. I am the institution. Ashworth cited cases older than most people in the room. Decisions handed down 40, 50 years ago. Dusty landmarks enshrining procedures that had calcified into quiet injustices. He mentioned landmark rulings in a tone that suggested they were holy texts, immune to question, untouchable simply because they had survived. At his table, Jasmine sat motionless, her hands folded neatly on her portfolio. She did not frown. She did not shake her head. She simply waited, like a storm sitting patient on the horizon, gathering strength. When Ashworth finally concluded, smiling like a man who had just buried his opponent under a mountain of citations, he glanced over at Jasmine, a flicker of smugness, a silent dare. Your move, rookie. Jasmine rose slowly. No rush, no rattled papers or clumsy movements. She lifted from her bag something that immediately caught the eye of everyone in the gallery, a battered legal book. The cover was faded, the edges frayed, pages visibly annotated, tabbed, underlined by a hand that had not just studied the law but lived inside it. It was not a prop, it was a weapon. The room leaned in, almost as one organism, feeling the shift. Jasmine placed the worn book carefully on the podium, flattened one hand atop it like grounding herself in something bigger, then looked up, straight at Judge Chen. Your Honor, she began, voice steady. I appreciate my learned colleague's devotion to precedent, but it is important to remember. She flipped open the battered volume to a marked page, her fingers finding the line without hesitation. That precedent, while persuasive, is not eternal. It is the Constitution that must endure, not outdated. Procedures, not comfort zones, and certainly not habits rooted in different eras. She raised her eyes, pinning Ashworth with a calm so sharp it felt almost violent. In Baxter versus Superior Court, she said, her tone precise as a scalpel, decided in 1974, the court ruled under a vastly different standard of due process than the standards clarified by Gideon versus Wainwright, and later, reinforced by the Ninth Circuit decisions as recent as 5 years ago. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Every citation she dropped hit like a hammer wrapped in velvet, elegant, devastating, undeniable. Ashworth opened his mouth, then closed it again. He shifted his weight, suddenly looking very much like a man standing on ground he had assumed was solid, only to realize it was crumbling beneath him. The gallery caught it. Reporters scribbled faster. Students barely breathed. Even Judge Chen's posture shifted, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Jasmine pressed forward. Justice, she continued, her hand still resting gently on the battered book, requires evolution. It requires recognition that the practices of yesterday cannot be the excuses of today. Ashworth tried to recover. He coughed lightly and stepped forward again. But Your Honor, he said, voice a shade faster than before, consistency is the cornerstone of order. Jasmine spoke over him, not rudely, not loudly, just firmly, her words slicing through his like clean steel. Consistency without fairness, she said, is not order. It is oppression. The phrase cracked through the courtroom like a bullet. Somewhere in the back, someone gasped, quietly, involuntarily. Judge Chen's fingers tapped once against the arm of his chair, a slow, deliberate beat that spoke volumes. Ashworth retreated to his table, adjusting his cufflink with a little too much force. Jasmine stepped back too, not in defeat, but in silent, surgical victory. She closed the battered book gently, as if tucking away a sword after a clean kill, and sat down without a word. The sound of the battered legal book closing echoed in the courtroom like a gunshot muffled by thick velvet. It was a small sound, tiny, even, but in courtroom 7B, where every breath had begun to feel weighted, it landed like a gavel slamming down. Jasmine Crockett lowered the worn book gently onto her table. She did not toss it. She did not clutch it triumphantly. She simply placed it down, carefully, respectfully, as if setting down a sacred weapon after a clean, necessary battle. It was the softest mic drop anyone in that room had ever seen, and just like that the atmosphere shifted. It was not loud. It was not dramatic, but you could feel it, subtle, undeniable. The room leaned toward Jasmine, not literally, not like a movie scene with everyone standing and clapping, but in tiny, instinctive movements. Reporters tilted their bodies slightly. In her direction, pens poised differently. Students leaned their shoulders forward without even realizing it. Even the off-duty cops at the back, those hardened, skeptical types, stood a fraction straighter, listening with sharpened eyes instead of detached boredom. Judge Chen noticed it too. His eyes flickered across the gallery briefly, measuring the energy, tracking how it had shifted without a single shout, without a single demand. Ashworth adjusted his tie unnecessarily, a small tug at a knot that had not loosened, and more telling, his young associate, the fresh-faced lawyer at his table, looked deeply, visibly uncomfortable. Gone was the eager smirk that had played on the associate's lips earlier in the morning. Gone was the casual doodling in his legal pad margins. Now he sat frozen, pen hovering uselessly, eyes darting between his mentor and the woman who had quietly turned the tide. He leaned toward Ashworth, whispering something low and urgent. Ashworth shook his head once, sharply, the universal gesture for "sit still, let me fix this." But the associates' nervous glances betrayed the truth. They both knew they were losing. Jasmine remained still, a calm, steady presence at her table, her hands folded neatly on top of her portfolio. She was not gloating. She was not even smiling. She was simply there, a gravitational center that the entire room now orbited around. Judge Chen tapped his pen once, twice, 3 times against the wood of his bench, not impatiently, not dismissively, thoughtfully, measuring, re-evaluating. Every courtroom has an invisible balance of power, a weight that shifts almost imperceptibly when something important happens. Today, in this room, that balance had tilted, and it tilted toward Jasmine Crockett. Ashworth cleared his throat. The sound felt out of place, awkward, jarring, almost desperate. He rose again, trying to regain control. "Your Honor," he said, "with all due respect to opposing counsel's passionate argument, consistency provides stability." But even as he spoke, even as the words left his mouth, it was clear. He was not driving the room anymore. He was chasing it, trying to catch up to a momentum he no longer commanded. Jasmine did not interrupt him. She did not glance at the gallery. She simply watched him speak, a quiet, steady gaze that somehow felt heavier than any shouted objection could have been. Ashworth was still talking, but the courtroom was no longer listening to him. When he finished, Jasmine rose again, smooth, silent. She picked up a single sheet of paper from her folder, glanced at it briefly, not because she needed to, but as a deliberate, measured act of control, then folded it and set it neatly aside. Another small movement, another silent signal. "I own this pace now, not you." She stepped forward, not rushing, not slowing, and addressed Judge Chen directly. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "stability is only valuable if it serves justice. Without fairness, stability is merely the preservation of injustice." The words hit the room with a weight that no objection could lift. Judge Chen leaned back again, not dismissively, not skeptically, reflectively, and at his table, Leonard Ashworth's young associate looked down at his notepad, realizing he had no notes worth writing, because the story of this day was already being written by someone else, and her name was Jasmine Crockett. The words had barely settled when Ashworth struck. Like a man grasping at the last rung of a crumbling ladder, he surged back to the podium, voice louder than necessary, tone sharper than it needed to be. "Objection, Your Honor," he barked, the echo of it bouncing off the high marble walls. "This is a mischaracterization of long-established precedent." The suddenness of it jolted the room. Several students jumped in their seats. Reporters blinked up from their notes. Even the court clerk, who had maintained a robotic calm all morning, flinched slightly at the outburst. Ashworth's face was taut, the polished courtroom mask cracking around the edges. This was not strategy anymore. This was survival instinct. Judge Chen didn't immediately respond. He sat still, fingers steepled again, his eyes locked on Ashworth with the patience of a man watching a candle sputter its last gasps of flame. The silence stretched, long enough for the gallery to shift uncomfortably, for Ashworth's young associate to sink lower in his seat, for the weight of desperation to become visible. Then, without theatrics, without even a raised eyebrow, Judge Chen spoke. "Overruled," he said, the word landing like a flat, inevitable hammer. No explanation, no sympathy, no rescue line thrown out for the drowning, just overruled. And if you listened closely, you could almost hear it, the last threads of Ashworth's control snapping invisibly in the air. At her table, Jasmine Crockett did not react, did not smirk, did not flinch. She simply reached for her glass of water, the same glass she had sipped from before, lifted it slowly, sipped carefully, set it back down with deliberate precision, ice in her veins. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. No gloating, no chest beating, no loud victory, just a woman so composed under fire that even her sips of water felt like declarations of war. Ashworth retreated back to his table, his movements tighter now, his shoulders stiff with unspoken frustration. Jasmine remained steady. The tide had turned long ago, and now even the tides were carrying her forward. She was not fighting to survive anymore. She was fighting to finish. Jasmine Crockett rose from her seat one final time. No rush, no showmanship, just the same deliberate grace she had wielded all morning, the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly where they stood, and exactly what they had come here to do. She stepped forward, not too close to the bench, not invading, just closing the space enough that her words would land without needing to shout. She placed one hand lightly on the podium, the battered legal book, still resting near her fingertips like a silent ally, and lifted her eyes to Judge Chen. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm, powerful, direct. "Consistency in our courts is important." A small nod, acknowledging the argument Ashworth had tried so desperately to salvage, respecting it but not submitting to it. "But," she continued, "tradition must serve justice, not enslave it." The phrase fell into the courtroom like a dropped stone, rippling outward, pulling every ear, every heart, closer to her. She paused, not because she needed to catch her breath but because she knew the silence was her ally now too. She let the weight of the words settle into the marble floors, the oak-paneled walls, the thousand unspoken judgments hanging in the air. Jasmine pressed on, the perfect blade of logic and emotion merged into a single strike. "Precedent gives us stability," she said, "but justice demands vigilance, demands that we question old paths when they lead us away from fairness." Her tone stayed level, no rising into theatrics, no pounding fists, just a calm, relentless building of force, like water wearing down stone. "And it is not merely theory at stake," she added, her voice dipping lower, drawing the room tighter around her, forcing even the most distracted mind to focus. "It is the young man seated behind me. It is the mother in the gallery who dared to hope. It is every citizen who walks into these courts believing, trusting, that the law sees them." She glanced briefly toward her client, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, real, human, undeniable. Then she returned her gaze to the bench, planting herself like an immovable pillar. "Justice," Jasmine said, "must not be tradition's prisoner. It must be its master." The words landed. No. Breath stirred in the courtroom. Students gripped their pens but did not move them. Reporters forgot their deadlines, their notebooks half-filled. Even the clerks stilled behind their laptops, watching her as if afraid to blink and miss it. It was a rare thing to see. The exact moment a courtroom surrendered, not to bluster, but to quiet, irrefutable truth. Jasmine said nothing more. She simply bowed her head slightly, a soldier acknowledging a battlefield she had conquered without ever needing to fire a single wild shot. And then, with perfect calm, she returned to her seat, hands folded, breathing steady, waiting. For a long suspended moment after Jasmine Crockett sat down, the courtroom stayed frozen, like it had forgotten how to move, how to breathe, how to exist, without the weight of her voice filling it. Judge Chen remained motionless behind the bench. Only his fingertips moved, tapping lightly against the polished wood, a rhythm of thought so subtle it barely disturbed the charged air. Then, slowly, he leaned forward. He adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat quietly, and spoke. "This court," he said, his voice calm but carrying a new undeniable weight, "has reviewed the arguments presented by both parties." A soft shuffling sound rose from the gallery, the instinctive leaning in of bodies hungry for a verdict. Ashworth sat stiff at his table, shoulders rigid, his young associate pale and still beside him. Jasmine remained steady, unmoving, a statue of patience. "While procedural traditions offer consistency," Judge Chen continued, "they are not immune to challenge when credible constitutional concerns are raised." Another tiny sound rippled through the gallery, a sharp, involuntary inhale. the kind of collective gasp people make when they realize something historic is happening, and they're inside the room when it does. It is the finding of this court, Chen said, that Miss Crockett has raised substantial and serious questions about the fairness of the procedural rule in question. He paused just long enough for the words to sink like anchors into the marble floors. Accordingly, he concluded, a review of the rule's application will be ordered. For half a second there was pure silence, and then an almost imperceptible exhale from the gallery, the kind of breath people had been holding without even realizing it. Relief, awe, respect. Jasmine Crockett did not smile. She did not pump her fist. She did not even allow her shoulders to shift in triumph. Instead, she offered a single silent nod, small, composed, devastatingly powerful, a warrior acknowledging a hard-won ground, not celebrating it. Judge Chen glanced briefly at her, his expression unreadable, but the slight incline of his head, the almost invisible twitch at the corner of his mouth, said everything. Respect, earned the hard way. Across the aisle, Ashworth's jaw tightened. His young associate lowered his eyes to the table. The verdict had been delivered, and it had not been their story to tell. The second Jasmine Crockett stepped through the courthouse doors, the wall of reporters descended like a wave crashing against stone. Cameras flashed in rapid fire, the light strobing against the white marble steps. Microphones shoved toward her. From every angle, voices shouted over each other. Congresswoman Crockett, how does it feel to win today? Do you think this will set a national precedent? Was Judge Chen's ruling what you expected? The chaos buzzed at a deafening pitch, a sea of noise, heat, and questions that blurred into one another. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She paused at the top of the steps, took a single breath, and lifted her hand slowly, signaling for quiet. It took a second longer than it should have, but the crowd obeyed. A hush, heavy and expectant, settled over the scene. Jasmine's voice, when it came, was even and clear. No grandstanding, no speeches, just the same calm truth that had carried her through the courtroom storm. I'm proud of the arguments we made today, she said, but this was never about me. She let the words hang there, simple, unpolished, powerful. This is about the people who believe in justice, even when the system teaches them not to. The cameras kept clicking, but the tone shifted. No longer a hunt for a soundbite, no longer a frenzy, just listening. Reporters shouted a few more questions, but Jasmine didn't linger. She nodded politely, guided her client and his family down the steps and moved through the crowd with the same deliberate calm that had become her signature. The waiting car was parked at the curb. The client's mother, a woman who had spent most of the hearing clutching her purse and praying silently, reached out to Jasmine before she could climb inside. Her hand trembled slightly as she touched Jasmine's arm. No big speech, no rehearsed thank you, just one soft, raw whisper, thank you for seeing him. Her eyes, red and tired, said more than words ever could. Jasmine smiled gently, not a politician's smile, not a winner's grin, just a quiet acknowledgement between two women who understood what had really been fought for today. You fought too, Jasmine said softly. I just made sure they heard you. The mother's hand squeezed her arm once, then let go. Inside the car, the world outside felt distant, muted by the hum of the engine and the thickening dusk. Jasmine leaned back against the seat, exhaling slowly, letting the exhaustion seep into her bones but not letting it settle. Not yet. Her client sat beside her, eyes wide, hands twisted together in disbelief and tentative hope. He did not speak. He did not need to. Sometimes gratitude speaks loudest in silence. The car pulled away from the courthouse. Reporters melted into the backdrop. The flashing lights faded behind them like dying stars. Los Angeles stretched out ahead, its skyline, bruised purple and gold by the sinking sun. And Jasmine Crockett, for the first time all day, allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. Not a battle won, a beginning forged. Later that night, in the quiet hum of her small apartment, Jasmine sat alone at her kitchen table. No staff, no cameras, no reporters shouting questions into the dark. Just her, a battered yellow legal pad, and a pen. She flipped to a fresh page. At the top she wrote 2 words, next steps. Her mind buzzed with possibilities, legislation, community education, building alliances with other advocates who were ready to crack open old systems and let the light pour in. It would not be fast. It would not be easy. It would not make headlines most days. But Jasmine understood something most people missed. Winning a courtroom victory is loud, Changing a system is quiet, slow, relentless work, and she was ready for it. She set the pen down, leaned back in her chair, and looked up at the ceiling, feeling the fire still burning steady in her chest. Tomorrow the world would wake up and move on. News cycles would spin, other battles would rage, but tonight was for planting seeds that would not be pulled up tomorrow, or the day after that, or the year after that. Tonight was for the work that would last, and Jasmine Crockett, she had only just begun. Victory in a courtroom is a powerful thing. It echoes off marble walls. It splashes across headlines. It feels sharp and immediate, like stepping into the sunlight after a long, hard storm. But Jasmine Crockett knew something deeper, something quieter, something truer. Winning a courtroom is important. Courtroom is. But changing a system, changing the world it touches, is the real mission. And that mission, it is not won in a single day. It is not won with a single ruling. It is won slowly, patiently, with steady hands and an unshakable will. Some battles are fought with fire and fury, but the battles that matter most, they are fought with calm, with relentless truth, with the courage to stay standing when the room laughs. If Jasmine Crockett's story teaches anything, it is this: you do not have to shout to be powerful. You do not have to storm the gates to be unstoppable. You do not have to roar to be heard. You just have to be ready, ready to hold steady, ready to face the laugh, ready to outlast it, ready to quietly, methodically, rewrite the ending. Somewhere in the quiet hours after the courthouse emptied, after the headlines blazed across screens and faded, Jasmine Crockett sat alone, the battered yellow legal pad before her, a pen in her hand and the fire still burning inside her chest. Not a fire of anger, not a fire of vengeance, a fire of purpose. The kind of fire that does not burn out because it does not burn for attention. It burns for change, for better futures, for all the voices still waiting for someone brave enough to speak when it matters. And, as the night stretched out across Los Angeles and the world rolled onto its next story, Jasmine Crockett stayed at her table, scribbling notes, planting seeds, preparing for battles no one would ever televise, but battles that would matter, all the same. Because for some warriors, the victory is not the end, it is just the invitation to fight harder.